Hi, my name's Dan, and this video is one in a series of videos I'm doing about the design of armor and armor sets for video games, which is in turn part of a larger suite of videos that I am doing on game design topics. And in this one, I'm going to present some design thoughts, some thoughts for the designer to consider when they're in the process of designing armor. Most of these series have one video in them that are called Design Thoughts, and so that's how this one fits in to the general scheme of things. I don't think there's a huge amount to say in terms of armor and design thoughts. There's some obvious things which I will go through. I don't think armor in many ways has the same need for depth in thought in design as some other aspects of games. I don't think players get quite so attached to their armor as to their weapons, except for one aspect, which is appearance, which I'll talk about a bit later on. The first thing I do want to say, though, is that armor, this is really obvious, armor is a great way to make the PC more resilient. And effectively, it's a mechanic excuse for being able to get the player to be tougher as they go through. And this, of course, aligns with the real-world idea of armor, of making fighters more able to be resilient to damage. And as you progress through a game, player characters often get considerably stronger, more powerful, more able in many ways. But unless you have some strange mechanic which allows the player's skin to slowly harden as they play, sorry, not the players, the player characters, I try to be careful about these distinctions, then you need some kind of external way of doing that, and armor is a good way of doing this. There is an effect, though, of this as the armor gets stronger as you go through the game. Potentially, which is because the player absorbs less damage this as they go along, this may mean that there's a, I want to say danger, it may be an aspect that an individual combat may take longer. And so there is a kind of balancing effect to be had between how fast you advance weapons and other aspects that do damage, and how fast you advance armor and any other aspects that prevent damage. If you kept armor the same all the way through, then as your enemies get more powerful, then the danger to the player over a period of time gets worse and stronger, and you'd have to make your weapons get stronger, but combat would slowly get quicker, because either the player would die very, very quickly, or they would have to dispatch their enemy quickly. Conversely, if the only thing that you upgraded was the armor and not the weapons as the player goes through, then combat will be slower as you progress through. So this is an aspect to think about as you're designing together your weapons and your armor, is do you want your length of time for combat to be about the same, or to change in some way as you go through the game? And that will affect the balance of how you progress those two aspects together. I think that's probably the most profound thing that I've got to say about the design of armor and armor systems, is that relationship between it and weapons and how it affects combat. The rest is, I think, plainly obvious to anybody who'll be watching this video, but I will go through them anyway. So I've got 5 quick aspects that I want to go through. So the first question is, how does it work? So in the previous video to this one in the series, I talked about whether armor does damage reduction or damage avoidance. I talked about armor slots. I talked about durability. So the mechanics of armor are things that you're going to need to decide. These are design decisions that they obviously have an effect of the game overall, but I think you probably can understand what those effects are, I would think. How many items are you going to have in your game? The more complex a game, the more items there tends to be. RPGs often have a lot of items involved in game. And that then affects how much design work you've got to do in terms of the details and the naming and etc. for your different items. Some games go down the routes of having different types of item. So in the next video, I'll talk about the classic sets of armor for medieval/fantasy settings. Alongside that, sometimes games have tiers of armor. So they'll have sets of armor that go together, but you're expected to advance through these as you progress through the game. So you might have your basic leather set of armor, then you might have your slightly shinier leather set of armor, then you might have your Crusaders set of leather armor. And, so this then has a knock-on effect, obviously, for how many objects you're going to have to, how many items you're going to have to design. But designing them as sets together can be a thing. Okay, progress and unlocking. This is an aspect of many bits of or aspects of video games. So, and it's a thing to be thinking about when you're doing the details of armor. In, I guess, a couple of ways, as balance always seems to be, that you need to think about the balance over time as the player progresses through the game, and not have, unless you want it, particularly at huge jumps up in armor capabilities at points, or dwindling down even. Again, unless you want it for a really good reason. And then if you have different classes, and even more so if you've got PvP in different classes, the thoughts of how do you bring your armor and the availability of different armors to different classes to bear in the question of how do you create balance between the different classes. Okay, again, I think that's really obvious. So yes, I have just talked about balance as I do in the progress and unlocking. So that's aspect number 4. And then aspect number 5 is the appearance aspect. So I think, I said at the beginning of the video that I don't think there's a lot of emotional connection with armor, except potentially to do with the appearance. And I think there are a couple of things that I want to talk about here. One is the tendency for many games to produce armor that looks like this for their female characters. And I don't know whether you watching this think that this is an issue or a problem or not, but it is a topic of discussion in the games industry and amongst game players as to whether the over-sexualization of female characters in games is problematic. And I don't want to get into that in this particular video. I might do in another video at another time. The other aspect of appearance is just, armor that looks nice. And here's a few different sets of armor from the same game. And some of these look particularly nice, I would think. And sometimes the draw of what the armor looks like can be more powerful than the draw of how effective the armor is. So I have a daughter, and she likes playing some games. She would be more attracted to having some armor if it was purple than if it was particularly good at deflecting damage, because the appearance of things is very important to her. So for me, it would be only a small amount of consideration. For some players, it is a large consideration, and it is worth bearing this in mind when you're creating armor sets. What are the aesthetics going to be like? Because this will be important to some players. Anywho, that was a whole lot of stuff. Some random rambling through some design thoughts by me, and that's it from me for now.